You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
There's a coup going on in the African state of Guinea. We'll be trying to make sense of it during the course of the show. But maybe all you need to know is that while the deposed president was once one of Tony Blair's blue-eyed boys, he's recently fallen out with him. And the coup leader was recently pictured with AFRICOM, the American armed forces that are spreading like a virus throughout the continent. And we'll be looking at Prince Charles. Another day, another Sunday, and the Queen is being brought into disgrace by her offspring. This time not Prince Andrew, but Prince Charles, who just happens to be the heir to the British throne. We'll be talking about that, particularly in my monologue. We'll be talking about Afghanistan. We'll be talking about men and women. I am old enough to remember the days when one could use that phrase without fear or favor. Now, you'll probably get slapped a writ from someone or other. We'll be talking about the United States of America. We'll be talking about the flooding there in the context of climate change. And we'll hear from an author who alleges that Robert Kennedy, Bobby, saintly Bobby, murdered Marilyn Monroe with his own hands. I don't believe it either, but we'll give him a good say on this Open University of the Airwaves. So fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
Now, I'm an expert on a few things, a real expert on one or two. Guinea and Africa, I'm not so up to the minute. So if you know what's going on in Guinea right now, we want to hear from you. When I hear that a president is being overthrown by the military, I don't usually jump for joy, and I'm not jumping for joy with this one. Although the current, or maybe deposed, president of Guinea was once one of Tony Blair's great Africa adventure. The white man's burden was assumed by Tony Blair. He got to work reordering the affairs of Africa once the kaleidoscope had been shaken by the events of 9/11. And he picked favorites. Some of them are still his favorites, like Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda. Others, like Museveni in Uganda, not so much, though they were once the blue-eyed boys of the IMF and the World Bank, as well as Tony Blair Inc. Museveni is now regarded as moving in the direction of China. There is a great ideological, geopolitical struggle going on in Africa. On one side are the colonial powers who want to take things out of Africa. On the other side is China, which for the time being at least wants to put things into Africa, like roads and bridges and infrastructure and internet, and try to help the local regimes and governments there to drag their people out of poverty as the Chinese state has dragged its. Of course, people are rightly anxious that we don't swap one colonial power with another colonial power. The difference is China has never acted so far as a colonial power, where the actual colonial powers have been doing so in Africa for centuries. So in the context of that geopolitical, ideological struggle, everything must be seen. And so what I can see so far as happening in Guinea is that the head of an elite military force, trained, in fact, the pictures are not a week old, by AFRICOM, by the American military effort going on all over Africa in a very substantial way, has captured the existing president of the country, whose whereabouts are now unknown. There's a fight going on, though. Other elements of the army, not in the elite forces, are fighting to save his presidency. As we get news throughout the course of the show, we'll bring it to you. And any experts out there, I'm just the enthusiastic amateur, remember, can call the show or tweet us. Let us know your perspective on the events unfolding in Guinea. Now, of course, it's Sunday, so of course there's another Sunday newspaper scandal to be faced by the poor reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, whose family have dragged her into one scandal or another. Everybody knows, and we've covered it very closely, the travails caused to the Queen by the activities, alleged activities, of Prince Andrew and the Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, Victoria Giuffre affair. And we will, of course, follow that story right to the end. But this time, it's rather more serious even than that, because the prince in disgrace this weekend is the one who will be King of England, King of the United Kingdom, the very moment that life passes from Her Majesty Long Life Tour, for lots of reasons. First of all, because she doesn't get into scandals, and secondly, because the moment she passes, Prince Charles becomes the king. Now, Charles has got a lot of, how shall I put it, weak points. But one of them is the man that he has appointed as head of the Prince's Trust, his main financial vehicle. That man has been sacked twice and brought back twice because the Prince is exceedingly close to him, especially in the past. The Prince can't live without him, he said, when bringing him back for the second time after his second sacking. He's now been sacked a third time because of a lurid story this weekend about that individual's relationship to a squalid Saudi billionaire to whom he offered in print, in black and white, on his own headed notepaper, support for a knighthood in exchange for £1.5 million donated to the Prince's Trust to assist with its overhaul and upgrade of a house not that far from where I live called Dumfries House. Now, these kind of things, these offerings of honours in exchange for favours, happen all the time. But they are a criminal offence. And so I suppose if you're in the honours broking business, the trick is not to get caught doing it. But this genius put it in a letter that we will support, Mr. Saudi oligarch, your application for British citizenship and the upgrading of the honour you've already got from Prince Charles into a full knighthood. Now, the man has now stepped down. His name is faucet. I know American viewers and listeners will be laughing already about that. The tap has been turned off for the moment, but the media are in full hot pursuit of Mr. Fawcett, and by extension, the man who has thrice appointed him to his right hand. When I say he was his right-hand man, I don't imply anything improper there. I know nothing of the prince's private life beyond that which he himself brought into the public. But Mr. Fawcett is metaphorically not only his right-hand man, not only his deep throat through which he leaks all kinds of politically inspired initiatives and views, but is his chief factotum, his flunky in toto. And now the prince is without him. If the crown is anything to go by, I can just imagine Prince Charles climbing the walls at the moment. But doesn't this story demonstrate the deep corruption that lies at the heart of British public life? It's covered in a veneer of hokum pokum. It's covered in a veneer of elaborate, performative politeness. But it's just as corrupt as any potentate in Africa or Asia or anywhere else. It's just usually delivered rather more circumspectly, rather more politely, gently than it has been on this occasion. We'll be talking to the Right Honourable Norman Baker, a Privy Councillor. That means a councillor not to the Queen's privy, but to the Queen herself. He is the author of a very powerful book that we have showcased on the show before, and he's demanding that the Metropolitan Police investigate this cash for honours scandal. We'll be talking also about Afghanistan. It seems like an age now that the Taliban have been in power. Predictably, they are scrubbing the beauty parlours and ladies' hairdressers of anything that could remotely look like a woman. Sounds a bit like Nicola Sturgeon's Scotland, where, of course, it's all chest-feeding and pregnant people, and where the rights of men to identify as women is now trampling underfoot the hitherto existing and hard fought for rights of women. We'll be touching on that subject too. And we'll be looking at an allegation in a new book, predictably called Bombshell, against a personal, not hero, he wasn't great enough for long enough to be a hero, but someone for whom, for a variety of reasons, I hold in great affection. I refer to Bobby Kennedy. According to the author of this book, Bobby Kennedy murdered Marilyn Monroe. Yes, with his own hands, he murdered her because she was apparently about to, if you'll forgive the phrase, blow the fact that she'd had an affair with Jack Kennedy, the president, and Bobby Kennedy, the Attorney General. I'm not sure who would have published that at the time. And for the author, helpfully, no documentation exists to support the allegation that she was about to blow, and all the participants are helpfully dead and beyond suing. If that sounds jaundiced, it kind of is, but I'll give the author a fair crack of the whip. Because I'm old-fashioned. In the week that Chinese TV has banned what they call sissy men from the television screen, men that are effeminate, and ordered all the networks to replace them by what they called real men, I'm here to tell you that the mother of all talk shows is presented entirely by a real man. Nobody ever called me sissy. It's going to be a great show, I think. We'll be talking about all kinds of things. But I want to close with something that is of interest generally, but of special interests where I live in Scotland. There's an organisation called Women Won't Wheesht. Wheesht. Women won't stay quiet. We have reached a situation in Scotland now where, as I told you last week, and 522,416 people watched me tell you, that's how many watched the show last week, that children aged 4, i.e., my middle daughter, Orla, aged 4, is now entitled to tell her teacher she wants to be regarded and treated as a boy and called not Orla but Oliver. She wants to be able to use the boys' lavatories, get changed in the dressing room with the boys, play in the boys' sports leagues at 4, and worse, dear viewer, dear listener, that the school will give her an undertaking that they will not tell me or her mother that that's what she's doing in school every day. This monstrous excrescence of the so-called LGBTQI plus agenda has reached stratospheric levels of madness. So much so that a mosque bomber in the United States has just asked the American justice system to treat her as a woman prisoner. And so her putative mass murder will enter history as having been carried out by a woman rather than a man. It's reached such madness that when men who identify as women were literally threatening with violence the Women Won't Wheesht protesters outside the Scottish Parliament on their pots and pans demonstration just a few days ago in Edinburgh, the police were more likely to arrest the women demanding the rights of women than they were to arrest those threatening violence upon those women who were dressed as women, who identify as women, but were in fact men. And the reason for the protest was not just these guidelines to which I have just referred, but because a woman was on trial from their organization in Scotland for wearing a suffragette ribbon, which has become the motif of those that demand women's rights be protected in Scotland. She's on trial for that. It's a hate crime to stand up for women in Scotland today. Don't think I'm being parochial, because all of this garbage came from the United States in the first place, and it is sweeping across the Western world. Who knows? Maybe it'll be implemented in Guinea if the coup goes the right way. You're watching the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned for the next 2 hours and 40 minutes. Here's my first tweet. Should Prince Charles A succeed? For American viewers and listeners, I mean succeed to the throne. A succeed, B, abdicate for his eldest son, William? Or C, make way for a president, just like you've got? Why should you have all the Joe Bidens and Donald Trumps? Why can't we have our own Joe Biden, our own Donald Trump? And here is my first break question. This was the week in 1997 of the funeral of Princess Diana at Westminster Abbey. Which pop star played at the funeral? A, David Bowie, B, Midge Ure, C, Elton John. The answer right after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Hey you, do you want to know more of what's happening in the world right now? Of course you do. But getting to the heart of the story, well, that's going to take some hard work. That's why here at the Mother of All Talk Shows, we've created that program just for you, hosted by one of the world's most sagacious minds. Get a perspective, an education on stories from all around the world, dissected and discussed with you. Join our debate, vote in our polls on Twitter, tweet a question to George, or call in now to give us your perspective on the stories the rest of the world simply isn't talking about. Join the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees, hosted by one of the world's greatest orators. The Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway. Let's make sense of the world together.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The Mother of All Talk Shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
The answer was, of course, Elton John, who played and sang Candle in the Wind at Princess Diana's funeral. I date that day to the day Britain started going completely mad. Should Prince Charles A succeed? 32%. B, abdicate for William? 40%. C, make way for a president like the Americans have got? Just 28%. That's going great guns. So keep your voting going on my Twitter handle at George Galloway. Speaking of guns, Major David McBride is a military hero, not just because he put his life on the line in uniform, but because he spoke out about crimes that he saw being committed by other men in uniform in Afghanistan. We featured him in one of the most popular interviews of recent times here on the Mother of All Talk Shows. And I wanted to catch up with how his prosecution, yes, you get prosecuted for telling the truth, ask Julian Assange, but also how he was feeling as he watched the withdrawal from the country in which he had served. And he joins me now, Major David McBride. Thank you very much indeed for joining us again. First of all, a lot of military ex-servicemen, serving servicemen and women have felt great anguish as they saw a 20-year war end in such bloody disarray in Afghanistan. What did you feel about it?
A greater reveal, I guess, of the curtain falling down as to what we saw on the 15th of August. It was showing the world that everything there was a lie, and the fact that the President Ghani took off with a bag full of money, ran for the hills with his supporters, and everything collapsed, and the Americans did have to escape by helicopter from the roof of their embassy, having said that would never happen. It revealed to the world what I and pretty much everybody who worked there knew. It was a debacle. It was all a lie. And we had done nothing but enrich ourselves and completely break the country all over a course of 20 years, and that senior people in the UK, the US and Australia had lied to the public, repeatedly lied to the public about what was really going on for their own self-serving means. And it was all revealed. Now I'm hoping to use it to get some accountability.
The last American serviceman killed in Afghanistan was 4 years old when it began. There have been few wars, certainly since the dawning of the 20th century, that lasted 20 years. It's an epoch, historically speaking. The Australians were involved in it right from the start. What is the state of Australian public opinion now about the sacrifice they made in this war?
I think Australians are rightly very embittered about it, and there is a huge amount of questioning of us immediately going to war with the US. You know, if the US is like the school bully of the world, Australia is like their flunky, and we just follow them around. And whenever they do something, we stand behind them and go, yeah, and us too. You know, we didn't even put a moment's thought into going to war with the US. We didn't put a moment's thought into their completely unworkable plan. We just said, yeah, whatever the US wants, that's great. They're our allies. And I think more and more people now, in fact, I can't imagine there's anybody in Australia that doesn't say, this damaged our soul. This permanently damaged our national psyche, that we will go and sacrifice the lives of our soldiers. We will kill thousands of Afghans and achieve nothing. We are better than that as a nation. And people are beginning to question that the government is telling us the truth, that the government really cares about the life of servicemen, and the government cares about these things they claim to care about. Freedom, which usually means money. We didn't care about the rule of law. We now try to say, oh, well, we were trying to help women and girls in Afghanistan. But that's just a propaganda lie. There were more freedoms for women and girls in Afghanistan when the Russians were running it. But of course, we couldn't have that, or the Americans couldn't have that, because they hated the Russians. And so they started this proxy war. And the very people they armed to start the proxy war, which was, of course, started when I was a kid, they were the ones who didn't want schooling for women and girls. They were our allies. We consistently aligned ourselves with the most odious people. And the majority of Afghans do not want the sort of people we aligned ourselves with, because the only thing they cared about was money. They didn't care about Afghanistan. They didn't care about people. They cared about getting money for their own tribal leaders. We still haven't had any accountability yet, and I think more will come out. As you know, it's quite hard to bring the massive population with you. But my big aim is to not stop here, but to say, we'll be open-minded about it, but we need to start finding out who knew what and when they knew it and whether they lied to the public. We need something a bit like the Chilcot inquiry that you had in the UK. And that's what I'm going to work with my allies, to say, let's find out. Maybe there's a good excuse, but let's find out what our leaders knew about this.
Well, I commend that ambition. One hopes that it isn't as long as the Chilcot inquiry, as delayed as its conclusions were, and as absolutely untouchable those even found remotely guilty by the Chilcot inquiry. We'll exchange notes on what kind of inquiry you should not have, Major, directly between you and me. But, I mean, you know, you did this in Vietnam. We did not. Australia was then, of course, in the 1960s, a much more Anglo-Saxon adjunct, if you like, than it is now. The pluralism in Australian society is much, much greater. But you did it again in Afghanistan. And if the Americans have their way, you'll do it again, along with Japan and one or two others, in the confrontation with China. It seems strange to me that a country like Australia, with a relatively small population and geographically situated in a way that doesn't have to get drawn into conflict after conflict for the edification of people many thousands of miles away. Is it because the political class in Australia are basically people whose minds are still in the 1960s?
Yes. And I think everything went downhill after the Vietnam War or during the Vietnam War. That was a big mistake. We increasingly got American intelligence bases in Australia. One prime minister tried to get rid of them, and the Americans got rid of him. It's we have this myth that the Conservatives say, oh, well, we need American intelligence. Well, the history of American intelligence is not good. They haven't foreseen any of the major events in the past 50 years, like the deposing of the Shah of Iran or the rise of the Taliban. They haven't seen anything. They haven't got anything right unless it's a coincidence. And the idea that we need American intelligence is ridiculous. But they have, like in your country, a bit like the Prince Charles thing you were talking about, they have huge amount of influence where they donate to politicians through various different companies, and they kind of own the politicians. If the public knew the truth about what it costs us to be effectively part of America, I don't think they would like it. And the only reason America needs us is because they can't carry out these foreign adventures on their own. That's why they wanted us to come to the Iraq War, because they could say, oh, look, there's this first world country that's with us. It's not just us. And you're right. My big fear is not trying to get accountability for Afghanistan, but I'm trying to avoid us going to war with China, which is being talked up all the time, in the same way that we went to war in Afghanistan. And I'm trying to show through the Afghanistan debacle that the way that we go to war is totally based on false information. It is based on propaganda from America rather than the truth. And yes, I'm trying to prevent the next war because it's likely. We haven't changed any of our senior military leaders. We haven't changed any of our senior intelligence people. So what do you think they're going to do? The next time America asks them, they'll be like, yeah. And the press have a lot to be responsible for because they print a lot of stuff which is clearly propaganda. And what chance have the public got when they assume that something in the major media outlets is based on some sort of truth? As we've seen from Afghanistan, the press played along with a lot of what we call information operations, which means lies by the government. And they are doing it again. There's always an anti-China story at the moment. There's always like some mysterious Chinese cyber attack, which no one can verify, but the media runs it as if it's fact. We get them from Russia too, supposedly. No one can verify whether that's true. And this is despite the fact that we have the ability to carry out false flag cyber attacks on ourselves. So we could easily fake it. But nobody questions these mysterious reasons for ramping up our security state. And it's considered a truism that war with China would be a good thing. Now, we should have learnt from Afghanistan. We should have learnt from Vietnam. Everybody in Australia now knows Vietnam was a bad idea, a stupid, poorly thought out attempt for Americans to increase their influence in the world. They're beginning to see that Afghanistan and Iraq were the same, but strangely enough, they don't necessarily see that trying to ramp up a war with China is exactly the same. So I need to work on that and to try to help people to see that we are being fooled time and again by this kind of slave relationship that the US has with us, and they need us only because they can say to the world, we're not doing this on our own.
Well, more power to your elbow, Major. Tell us about your own case. As I said earlier in preface, you blew the whistle on some quite horrendous war crimes allegedly carried out by Australian special forces and others in the war in Afghanistan. And instead of prosecuting them, they prosecuted you. What's the latest on your case?
Well, it's going to be drawn out for another year. It'll eventually be 4 years before I get into court. And so that is disappointing in some ways. It's not the fault of the judge. The judge has been extremely fair. Every time I put in a witness statement to say what happened, the military, of course, countered with 20 witness statements, which are all highly classified, probably the same sort of stuff you saw in the Chilcot inquiry. They're trying to avalanche me with this sort of, most of it is irrelevant information, and it's very hard for us to deal with it because everything is, I think, wrongly classified as highly sensitive stuff. And so that means it has to go around in literally an armoured car or thereabouts, and no one's allowed to see it unless they're in some sort of locked room. And for myself and my lawyers to study it is very hard. Anyway, the case has been put off for a year. I'm hoping I will see justice. The charges may eventually be dropped. We could have a change of government. The incoming government may think differently. I'm hoping in the meantime, the more and more scandals come out. One of the people, a major people accused of war crimes, is running a defamation action against the idea that he is a war criminal. If he loses that defamation action, it's a bit tricky for the viewers. You'll understand it. It will look effectively, it'll be the closest we will get to a trial. He's a famous person. He's one of the good examples of what I was trying to point out, in that he was a famous hero who got awarded every single medal possible. And yet there were, from the very beginning, there were people saying, you need to be careful. This is not necessarily what it seems. And I believe the government knew that, but they were more interested in positive appearances than they were the truth. And they didn't just give medals to the wrong people. They actually tried to put people, when they needed a scapegoat, they were that sinister. When they needed a scapegoat, they didn't have any problems with finding people who were just doing their job and chucking them in jail. We've become a very sinister, cynical organisation where we will sacrifice good people for the right press story. We will lionise bad people. We pretended the war was going well when it wasn't. And now we're probably going to do a whole new propaganda mission, not based on truth. We've become quite dystopian in Australia. And as you rightly pointed out, I'm the only one facing trial from the Afghanistan war, like the only one. Not a single senior official has even, been questioned or having to face some sort of a career. People who spent billions are not having any questions to answer about whether they did the right thing. It's just me, the whistleblower, who is facing trial. And it leads me to believe it's a bit like what Julian Assange has said. They didn't want to win the war. They just wanted to prolong the war because it was self-serving.
Well, dystopia, indeed. We both live there. Major David McBride, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Now, in This Week in 1960, Alfred Hitchcock's film Psycho was released. In it, where did the murder of actress Janet Leigh take place? A, the kitchen, B, the bath, C, the shower. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
And it's a very, thank you for, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
I bet some of you got that one wrong. Janet Leigh was murdered, or the character played by Janet Leigh was murdered in the shower. Should Prince Charles succeed to the throne? 31%, down 1. Abdicate for Prince William? 40%, the same. C, make way for a republic, for a president? 29%, up 1. On YouTube, 25% think that Prince Charles should succeed, 29% that he should abdicate, but 46% think we should go for a republic and have a president. How very interesting that is. And on Telegram, only 13% think he should succeed, 31% think he should abdicate, and 56%, a clear majority, think Britain should have a president rather than a king. Now, Matthew Cappuci was another very popular guest, a controversial one, but a very popular one, on climate change just a few weeks ago, since when the climate has been bucking like a bronco. It's boiling hot some places. It's a freezing cold summer where I live. And in America, there are floods. Boy, are there floods. So Matthew has kindly agreed to join us again on the mother of all talk shows. Matthew, I don't know if you saw some of the criticism following our last discussion. I remember seeing you disdain to engage with some of it, which was simply ill-mannered and disrespectful. But if I were to summarize, it would be to say that they call you a climate change denier. I myself formed no such view of you. I, if anything, thought that you were relatively close to my own uneducated, untutored position, that there's always been climate change, and that whilst we should endeavour to live as clean a life as we possibly can, with as little waste as we can possibly produce, and with sustainability always in mind, we can't go back to the Stone Age to try and turn back the tide. That's my view. Am I wrongly ascribing it to you?
Well, certainly the climate always has changed. The issue is now that human action and human intervention is accelerating that change more quickly than our infrastructure can keep up. There's certainly nothing inherently bad in of itself in the conditions that we're expecting, but it's that our infrastructure isn't ready, so it has a net negative effect. So ultimately, I'm very confident that humans are altering the climate largely in pernicious ways. I think I get a lot of criticism, though, from sort of both sides of the aisle, in that there are people who think I don't sort of push climate change enough, and there are people who think that I make too much about climate change. And ultimately, I've realized there's no way to satisfy everybody. But I'm not in the business of here trying to satisfy people. I'm in the business of trying to communicate strictly the science that we know and strictly the implications of said science. And what we know is that the climate has always changed, but that human action is also causing significant climate change, and that we have to respond to that. And ultimately, our infrastructure is at risk.
Flooding is one of the things that tests our infrastructure most severely, isn't it? We have crumbling infrastructure in your country and in mine. In mine, much of the infrastructure that deals with water is from not even the 20th century, but oftentimes the 19th. Certainly my own is. The recent flooding in the United States, how has that affected your thesis, if at all?
One of the things that we know about climate change is that for every degree Celsius the air temperature increases, the air can hold about 7% more water, which means you start tacking on a couple degrees of net warming over the course of however long. That reflects in very high-end rainfall in these short little bursts. And that's exactly what we saw last week on Wednesday night in parts of the Mid-Atlantic in New York City and really the Northeast. We had areas that saw about 3.25 inches of rain in just 1 hour's time, so more than 8 centimeters in just an hour's time. So they're getting about a month's worth of rainfall in a single hour. And events like that are very strongly tied to climate change. In fact, in the northeastern United States, we've seen about a 55% increase in these ultra high-end climate change or climate-fueled rainfall events. And so we're very confident in the connection between very heavy rainfall and human-induced climate change. Now, other things, for example, like the tornado that hit Maryland, people were angry at me for not connecting that to climate change. And really, we're not confident in our connections there. So for me, it's about connecting what we know and not connecting what we don't. And some people get upset about that. Ultimately, it's a matter of sometimes science being incompatible with their worldview, whether they're very pro-climate, anti-climate, whatever. Ultimately, we know that floods are very much connected to climate change. We know that tropical activity is fueled by climate change, particularly in regard to rapid intensifying storms and storms that reach these high-tier Category 4, Category 5 strengths, as they did in the U.S. Gulf Coast. So there are things we know that are connected to climate change and other things that aren't really linked, and that's just kind of how it goes.
And I'm guessing that New York City's infrastructure isn't exactly tip-top. Is that how it turned out?
I think the city was built largely for 1 to 2 inches of rainfall per hour. When we get 3.5 inches of rain in a single hour's time, even more in some places, more than 4, the infrastructure just can't handle that. And when you consider, too, the result of urban sprawl, all these areas that now have pavement, that have cement, that are completely paved over and offer no area for the rainfall to drain, it starts funneling into the subway systems, grinding rapid and public transportation to a halt, and you get this cascading effect that has implications all across the city and really across the transportation sector. And so the infrastructure is aging. It is not what I would consider modern in many areas. Of course, many Americans believe it is modern just because they're provincial and haven't traveled much. I'd like to see a significant investment in infrastructure and really planning for these higher end events that in previous years might have only occurred once every 200 to 500 years. Now we might be talking every 15 to 20 years. So we need to sort of change the benchmark that we're planning for.
And how has this year's climate been? Is it markedly hotter this year? I must say it didn't feel that way to me.
So ultimately, when we talk about the climate of an area, it's a 30-year average. So naturally, we're expecting some ups and downs and some ups and downs. In Europe right now, parts of the area have been under a pretty good down. Parts of the southwestern United States have seen their warmest summer on record. And so there are ups and downs across the board. It's more just that the ups outweigh the downs at this point, and they're seeming to do so every year. Very confident we'll be in a top 10 warmest year on record. We'll have to wait until December to see. But really, it's one of those things where now every year is kind of reaching one of those top tiers. Even if in a local area we're not running overly hot, globally the average is very much skewed warm, and that has the implications of more water vapor in the air or changing the jet stream and stuff like that.
Now, I absolutely concur with your view on infrastructure for lots of reasons, not only because of climate change. Infrastructure spending generates economic activity, it generates local demand, it provides jobs for people, it's a multiplier. I'm with you on that. I'm wondering what you think we should be doing to try and slow down the runaway train of climate change itself.
I think humans are inherently selfish in that anything we do right now realistically won't have much of a bearing on the conditions that we face. The climate is kind of like, as you said, a runaway train. And so slowing down a train or getting into reverse direction, which is unreasonable, it is very challenging and takes a long stopping distance or a long distance to change. And so in our lifetimes, we really don't have that much time to do so. The conditions are already moving. And even if we stopped emitting today, the climate would still continue to warm thanks to ocean outgassing of CO2 and thanks to all these other processes that are already in motion. And once you start tipping that scale, it's like dominoes. There are these reinforcing positive feedback mechanisms. So ultimately, we're not going to see an overnight change. We need to start playing the long game in that we need to understand any conditions or any actions we take aren't really going to help us that much. They'll help our children, our grandchildren, stuff like that. Getting policymakers to do that is telling them to be selfless, which is a challenge. The other thing I think we need to start doing is being smart about our infrastructure. Why are we building houses on stilts right next to the ocean when inevitably there's going to be a hurricane? It's going to be a strong hurricane somewhere. Why are we building in floodplains? Why are we planning our flooding infrastructure based on 100-year events rather than 500-year events? It's that we're making consciously poor decisions reinforced by the inveterate practices of yesterday's infrastructure building. And really, we're sort of reinforcing the old rather than trying to adopt the new.
But isn't, you talk of selfishness, much of the we've just had 2 weeks of the so-called Extinction Rebellion causing mayhem in London, not very environmentally conscious mayhem, I should say, at that. Left an awful lot of trash for people that are against trash. Their argument is essentially anti-growth. Whereas for someone like me, of my politics, I think that's selfish because they can live with no growth. They already live in a rich country and they're almost always the children of quite wealthy people. It's other people that need growth, need the generation of more wealth, so that they can get themselves out of poverty in our kind of country and by extension across the world, so that the poor world can become more prosperous. How do you square that circle?
I think ultimately people won't do something unless, on a large scale, unless it is financially sensible for them. And that makes sense because there are a lot of people who are in financial situations where they don't have the extra money to invest in something that may be better for the planet long term. And I can't blame them. If I'm decent off, but if someone tells me I can buy a green car for $70,000 or I can buy my truck, I drive a gas guzzler for $30,000, I'm going to choose a $30,000 car because financially that's what's feasible for me. I can't afford a $70,000 car. Until that technology is made available in a financially competitive way and an economically friendly way, it won't be adopted. Now, in the United States, solar energy is cheaper than natural gas, than coal, but the government has historically tried to sort of stand in the way of solar and stand in the way of wind and stand in the way of these different projects because in many areas, votes are based on sort of votes come from communities that have built themselves around the dying fields of coal and the dying fields of sort of fossil fuels, which, yes, we still need for some things, but But it seems like in some places people sort of resist change just because it's based on what they know versus sort of a hop into the unknown, even if the unknown is ultimately better and more financially feasible. So overall, I think people won't do anything unless it makes financial sense for them. Even I wouldn't. I know what the right answer is. The right answer is for me to drive a greener car, but I don't have that kind of money, so I can't do that. And until on a large scale that's made available for people, it's not going to happen.
That's fascinating stuff. Thank you, Matthew Cappuci. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again, but hopefully not in the wake of the kind of terrible flooding that we saw in New York. Thanks a lot for coming on the mother of all talk shows. Now, the poll is going great guns. Should Prince Charles succeed? 31%. Abdicate for William? 40%. Make way for a president? Just 29%. Although, on YouTube, 45% of people want us to have a president, and on Telegram, 54% want us to have a president. You'd think Telegram was Russian-owned or something. Emile Persaud says, bold of you to assume the Queen won't live forever. Long life to you, ma'am. Jonathan Wood says, no place for a monarchy as it currently exists. As Norman Baker's excellent book sets out, Norman Baker will be with us in the last hour. Our royal family and their collective actions are entirely in conflict with a democracy. Then there's the extreme privilege and wealth, which is immoral and unsustainable for workers. Are You Listening says, abdicate for Andrew would make good headlines. And Will Carpenter says, in a couple of generations, I believe the future of monarchy will be a hot political topic. The Queen is holding it steady. What comes after her will be very different. And Attila says, there needs to be a referendum on the monarchy when the Queen passes. At the very least, the population should be allowed a vote on who succeeds her. Kevin Hughes says, it's hard to believe that we're still having this conversation in the 21st century. Maybe we should sidestep the feudal traditions and royal protocols and just crown Fawcett to the fence. Marek says, for all the bad press Prince Charles gets, he actually does a great deal of good. Do tell. It is he who stands up for persecuted religious minorities, and seriously, anyone who's ever met him would tell you what a nice guy he actually is. I'm quite a nice guy, you know, if you want to offer me the gig. Captain Thunk says, hide the crown jewels, then abdicate in favour of William. Giggle like a schoolboy at William's coronation. Very, very witty, droll, and very interesting uptake on our poll. Coming up after the news with Jamie Lowe is that bombshell allegation that Bobby Kennedy murdered Marilyn Monroe with his own hands. And we'll be talking to the inimitable Rachel Blevins, who'll be talking to us about the American media and political scene. And you can, of course, call me 08081 96 5522. It's entirely free. If you're in the US, 1-844 944 3344. It's time for the news with Jamie Lowe.
Radio Sputnik News.
Vaccine passports will be required at the end of the month in nightclubs and other indoor venues in England, the vaccine minister has confirmed. Nadeem Zahawi said it was the right time to start the scheme for sites with large crowds, as well as over 18s will have been offered 2 jabs by then. Asking people to show certificates with COVID vaccination proof has been criticised by venues and some MPs. However, Zahawi said it would ensure that the economy could remain open. He added, quote, "One thing that we have learned is that in large gatherings of people, especially indoors, the virus tends to spike and spread." Zahawi also indicated the government's plans to offer a COVID booster jab to most vulnerable people, including all over 50s, could get the go-ahead at the end of the month. He said extending the vaccine rollout to 12 to 15-year-olds would absolutely be the right thing to do if the UK's chief medical officers recommended it. A former aide to the Prince of Wales has temporarily stepped down from his role as chief executive of the Prince's Foundation charity amid allegations that he used his influence to help secure an honour for a major donor. Michael Fawcett has been accused of offering to help a wealthy Saudi businessman with an honour. Mahfouz Marai Mubak bin Mahfouz received an honorary CBE in 2016. The Prince's Foundation said it was investigating the matter. The organisation is an umbrella group for a number of Prince Charles's charitable interests. Claims about Fawcett's conduct were published in the Sunday Times and Mail on Sunday today. The Sunday Times said Mahfouz, who denies any wrongdoing, donated large sums to restoration projects of particular interest to Prince Charles. Fawcett is alleged to have coordinated support for an honour. The head of Britain's armed forces said that everybody had got it wrong on how quickly the Taliban would take over Afghanistan. General Sinead Carter told the BBC it was the pace of it that surprised us, and I don't think we realised quite what the Taliban were up to. Asked whether military intelligence was wrong, he said the government received intelligence from a variety of sources. Quote, "It's not purely about military intelligence," he said. The last British and US troops left Afghanistan a week ago, bringing their 20-year military campaign in the country to an end. There has been criticism of the way the West withdrew from Afghanistan, with questions over how the Taliban was able to seize control of the country at such speed. Taliban militants in Afghanistan have shot dead a policewoman in a provincial city, relatives have claimed. The woman, named in a local media report as Banu Nagar, was killed at the family home in front of relatives in Firozkoh, the capital of Central Ghor province. The killing comes amid increasing reports of escalating repression of women in Afghanistan. Details of the incident are still sketchy, as many in Firozkoh fear retribution if they speak out. Relatives supplied graphic images showing blood spattered on a wall in the corner of a room and a body, the face heavily disfigured. One report suggested Nagar, who worked at the local prison, was 8 months pregnant. Saudi Arabia says it has intercepted 3 missiles and 3 drones fired by Houthi rebels in neighbouring Yemen. One was destroyed over the eastern city of Dammam, where falling shrapnel injured 2 children and damaged buildings, the Defence Ministry has said. The Houthis, who frequently mount such cross-border attacks, said they had targeted Saudi oil facilities. The other attacks were aimed at oil sites in the southern provinces of Jizan and Najran, the group said. In 2019, the rebels claimed responsibility for a drone attack on 2 facilities run by Saudi state-owned oil company Aramco. It temporarily reduced crude oil production by 5.7 million barrels a day, about half the kingdom's output at the time. Saudi Arabia entered the Yemen war in 2015 on the side of the internationally recognised government shortly after the Houthis seized the capital, Sana'a. The fate of Guinea's president, Alpha Condé, is unclear after an unverified video showed him in the hands of soldiers who said they had staged a coup. However, the defence minister has been quoted as saying an attempted takeover had been thwarted. This follows hours of heavy gunfire near the presidential palace in the capital, Conakry. Soldiers are patrolling the otherwise deserted streets of the city centre. In the video, the soldiers from a unit of elite special forces ask President Condé to confirm he is unharmed, but he refuses to respond. They say that all their land and air borders have been closed and the government dissolved. The Girls Aloud singer Sarah Harding, who had breast cancer, died on Sunday morning, aged 39, her mother has said. Harding announced in August 2020 that she had been diagnosed with the disease, which had spread to other parts of her body. Earlier this year, Harding revealed that doctors had told her she would not see another Christmas. And finally, a team of researchers from the University of Geneva has hauled a huge laser to a mountain top to shoot it at the sky and act as a high-tech lightning rod. The team is led by Jean-Pierre Wolf, a Swiss physicist who's been working with lasers for 20 years and has been particularly fascinated with attempting to control the weather with them. Lasers create very narrow, high-energy beams of light. Applications range from cutting diamonds to surgery to reading barcodes, and Wolf believes he can add another to the list, protecting us from lightning. After a year of delays due to the pandemic, the laser has been transported to the summit of Santis, a mountain in the Swiss Alps with an elevation of 8,200 feet. Quote, "This is one of the places in Europe that's struck by lightning the most," he explained. "There is a radio transmission tower there which gets struck 100 to 400 times a year, so it's an ideal place to make our proof of concept experiments." Traditional lightning rods are only able to protect a limited area on the ground, no matter how high they are built. Wolf hopes that the laser will help protect a larger area on the ground, although he can't say yet how much larger. The theory is that the laser can act both as a lightning rod, catching bolts that would strike anyway, and also trigger extra ones. Quote, "That would mean we would be unloading the thundercloud, reducing its voltage, and then preventing further lightning strikes in the surrounding area," said Wolf. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, for a variety of reasons, the Kennedys were quite important in my young life. As a 6-year-old, I could recite substantial sections of President John Kennedy's inaugural address. We had the portrait of the American president on our wall next to the Pope, just under the Pope, slightly below the Pope. It was very important for us, a person of Irish ethnicity and the Roman Catholic faith becoming president in redneck, WASP America was an important breakthrough for us, or so we felt. We saw them as, I suppose, I didn't think so at the time, but I now can see that we saw them, if you like, as a Camelot, a kind of Arthurian American royalty. I loved Jack Kennedy. I wept when he was murdered. I recall vividly when my father came out to go and play darts on a Friday night, as he normally did, and said that the president had been killed. And I wept there on the pavement at the age of 9. Just 4 years later, then politically active teenager, I saw the billboard of the Evening Telegraph, the local Dundee newspaper, and the billboard said that Bobby Kennedy had been murdered. And I wept again on a pavement in the street. When Ted Kennedy ran for president, I gave our now editor, my then intrepid friend, Ron Mackay, a journalist who was in the United States covering the presidential nominations when Ted Kennedy was running for the Democratic nomination, 1980. I gave my friend, I think, a £10 note, a Scottish £10 note, with a letter, and asked him to give it to Bobby Kennedy. Ted Kennedy for his election campaign. And I got a very good, nice letter from Senator Kennedy after he had failed. So what I'm trying to say is, I don't really like the besmirching of the Kennedy name. And so when I heard about this new book called Bombshell, The Night Bobby Kennedy Killed Marilyn Monroe, I didn't like it much. But I didn't dislike it enough to discount it, and certainly not to refuse a platform to the author of the book, who joins me now. He's Douglas Thompson. Douglas, welcome to the mother of all talk shows. It's quite a shocking idea that the Attorney General, the brother of the slain president, murdered an icon like Marilyn Monroe, murdered anybody. How do you justify that?
Source for the material is Mike Rothmiller, very much a patriotic American who, like you, was a Kennedy fan and a man distraught when he went through the files of the intelligence division of the LAPD, the Los Angeles Police Department, evidence which pointed towards the culpability of Bobby Kennedy being involved in the death of Marilyn Monroe. Mike found all this out during 10 years with the LAPD when he went through all the files, secret files. He wrote about them in '92, making mention of Marilyn Monroe, but not getting into the detail at that time. He didn't think America was particularly ready for it then. Subsequently, lots of questions that came up at the time of Marilyn's death in '62 about where Bobby Kennedy was. Was he in Los Angeles when it happened? Was he not? It was denied by Bobby Kennedy, denied by all the authorities, especially the man who became the chief of police, Darrell Gates. Subsequently, in 1985, Darrell Gates admits in his book that he knew all along that Bobby Kennedy was in town. A couple of years later, a Beverly Hills policeman acknowledges that he stopped the Attorney General and his brother-in-law, Peter Lawford, the night that Marilyn Monroe died. All circumstantial, but it all put Bobby Kennedy smack in the middle of Los Angeles when it happened, which had been vociferously denied until that point.
Douglas, what would be the motive for Bobby Kennedy bumping off Marilyn Monroe?
At that point, the Kennedys were coming up to they were looking toward the next election. They remembered, of course, you're talking at a time just coming out of the 1950s, Eisenhower, crew cuts, the short haircut, the whole kind of middle America attitude toward philandering, and just really the behavior of the president, the behavior of Bobby Kennedy. And I think they were threatened by Marilyn Monroe, who was about to have a press conference on the Monday of the following the weekend in which she died, to announce that she'd been having an affair with the Kennedys, the brothers, that they talked to her about Cuba, about Castro. So it would have been a political end to the Kennedys at that point. So that was the motivation.
But you would have had to kill a lot of women, Douglas, because Jack Kennedy was basically banging anything with a pulse, including in the White House. What was so special about this one?
Well, exactly. But as you would have realized, I think it was last weekend, there's the revelation of an intern that she'd had an affair, a real Me Too type of affair, with Kennedy back in the White House. But of course, all of this material was being sat on by the press. Secret Service agents never said anything. It really was a lid on it. Nobody else was threatening to go public. Nobody else was as big, really, in that sense, as Marilyn Monroe. And Joe Kennedy, the patriarch of the Kennedy family, had been having an affair with Gloria Swanson in full view of all of Hollywood for years, and no one had ever, there was never a mention of it. So I think the Marlin was it just was a threat to them. I take your point that there were plenty other possible targets for them, but I think if she was the only one that was going to come out of the woodwork.
I know the Kennedy brothers were close, but were they really that close that they'd both be sleeping with the same woman?
Oh, there seems to be, from all the surveillance of them, from the testimony from the wiretaps that were, Marlin's home was wiretapped. Peter Lawford, the brother-in-law's home, is wiretapped. They're wiretapping, party houses all across Los Angeles. And Kennedy himself was spotted by by the OCID, the intelligence division, with Marlin. There's photographs of him with Marlin, and obviously they've got Bobby Kennedy with her as well. So I think it's and from what Mike Rothmiller saw in the files, which was this diary, which he took contemporaneous notes of it at the time, and there are some parts he just didn't know what she was talking about, left them out. But he had, various mentions of both Kennedys, of Jack Kennedy sleeping with her, with Bobby Kennedy sleeping with her, and what they were saying, and going into the details of the relationships, which we go into in the book. The thing is, the fact that Bobby Kennedy kills Marilyn Monroe is the headline, but I think the whole book shows the LAPD working like a Praetorian Guard for the Kennedys, going back into the 1950s all the way through. And it's the cover-up, which, in a sense, when you get into it, is even more shocking than the actual event.
They certainly won a Praetorian Guard for Bobby on the night that he was murdered in that very same state of California. But J. Edgar Hoover hated the Kennedys with a vengeance. If all this was known, why wouldn't Hoover have ensured that was all in the public domain?
Hoover, at that point, the Kennedys, Bill Parker is the chief of the LAPD. He is in the running through the Kennedys to replace Hoover as head of the FBI. Hoover has the dirty material on the Kennedys and is using it on them to stay in position. So that's why Hoover had the information, but it was in his interest not to make it public, but to use it as leverage with the Kennedys.
Now, Douglas, how up close and personal does the book allege that Bobby got to Marilyn on the night of the killing, as the book contends? I mean, are we really saying he killed her with his own hands, or did he cause her to be killed?
Oh, well, I'll take you through how it happens. Bobby Kennedy, this is the story given to Mike Rothmiller by Peter Lawford, who was in the room when Marilyn died with Bobby Kennedy. What happens is that Bobby Kennedy arrives in Los Angeles, goes to see Marilyn at her home at lunchtime on the day she dies. It doesn't go well. There's arguments. There's a lot of animosity about what she's going to say, what she's not going to say. And there's a sort of search for a diary and paperwork. Various people had been at the home earlier in the day. they now vanish, are out of the scene before this kind of contretemps goes on. That night, Peter Lawford and Bobby Kennedy return. The scene becomes much more hysterical. Peter Lawford is in the room trying to calm Marlon down. Bobby Kennedy seems to kind of go out of the picture for a moment, and Lawford gets Marlon to sort of calm down for a bit. It gets her sitting down on the couch, and then Bobby Kennedy comes back into the room with a glass of water in which he's stirring something, which he then says, "This will help you, Marlon. This will calm you down." She doesn't want to drink it. Peter Lawford encourages her to drink it, saying, again, this will help you, just because she really is at this point hysterical. She drinks the liquid, which is by then clear. Within a few seconds, according to Lawford, she's comatose, and within little more time, she's dead. At that point, he's freaking. Bobby Kennedy seems to be more together than one must presume. He was pretty distraught too, but according to Lawford, more together than he was. What are we going to do? Kennedy says, we've got to get out of here. They go to the door. As they go out, LAPD guy is coming in the door. At that point, Kennedy and Lawford leave. That's when they're stopped driving at speed. Lawford is speeding in Beverly Hills. The cop stops him, recognizes Lawford, and Lawford says, I'm taking the Attorney General to the airport. And the cop says, you're going the wrong way. So he reverses on Pico Boulevard, and off he goes. At the same time, the OCID cops are cleaning up the what we would call it, a crime scene. At that point, there is an official call to the LAPD that Marlon Monroe is dead. And a guy called Sergeant Jack Clemens is the first official policeman to arrive at the scene. He's a guy who contacted Mike Rothmiller after Mike made mention of it in '92, and worked with him, information which is in the book. And Mike got a lot of stuff from Clemens, who was badmouthed by the LAPD and kind of turned into a bit of an outsider, because he said that what had happened was that there were several photographs of Marlon holding a phone, positioned this way and that way. And obviously the body had been moved. There was evidence of sort of liver damage in the back, where a body would have had to have been turned about like a mannequin, really. So all of that was happening as Bobby Kennedy is flying off up to San Francisco area, where he was on a family visit, rejoins his family and vanishes. And then from then on, all the various stories, Lawford's story, everybody else, the ambulance man, everybody else, is basically written by OCID. And that's the story that was given to the public. It was a suicide. It was, and of course, being that time, 60, again, back to the Eisenhower, you believed what authorities told you. You believed the police, you believed the government, you believed the council, you believed everyone. But that's what it was. It was a story. And, since then there's been more books, more films about what happened than more films in Marlon Monroe ever appeared in, I would think. But I think Mike got to the core of it through placing Bobby in the room with the drink. I think in the book we say he killed her. when people say, "Oh, murdered her," I don't know if you got a conviction of murder under Californian law. It would probably be manslaughter.
Well, I don't know. It's quite obviously premeditated. If, as they're leaving the house,
yes,
a cleanup squad is coming in, it's clearly a murder because it's premeditated, and indeed there's a conspiracy to kill her. So it's murder in the first degree.
The only problem with that, of course, is he's the Attorney General at that time. So, and the LAPD are, yes, but I take your point. Yes, I mean, it's the, and I think I went into at great length because Gary Allen Powers, who was the spy in the sky when I was in Los Angeles, he was the weatherman in a helicopter, but he was the American spy plane guy who was exchanged for the Russian spy.
He was the
Gary
one
Allen Powers,
shot down, yeah.
Well, when he was shot down, yes, exactly. Sorry, but he was given a particular poison, so that if he was shot down, he would take this like a cyanide pill. It wasn't a cyanide pill, but similar to that. It was like a silver dollar, the size of a silver dollar, and with a pill inside it. And Gary had as it turned out, the good sense not to take it. But when that was being developed, it was exactly the same time, and it was being developed by a CIA associate who worked with Bobby Kennedy. So you go into the realms of the conspiracy, the availability of the poison, and so on.
And yet, Douglas, the cynic will say, all the people involved in this story are helpfully dead. None can sue, and the diary, the documents that the police officer was relying upon have never materialized, never surfaced. So this could just be a down-at-heel, disgruntled LAPD detective selling a story.
It could be, but the problem is that he became a very serious intelligence consultant over many years that
makes him more suspicious, not less.
Okay, well, but he also gave evidence into the assassination of Bobby Kennedy to a grand jury because of his expertise. He's been helping Bobby Kennedy Jr. looking into the assassination of his father. The files, when he first wrote about the files in '92, the building where they were housed was I was going to say handcuffed, but it was chained up by the then police chief, and all the files were then sealed. And he has, as I say, he's got very good notes of everything that he read and the folders, and it's not just on the Marilyn Monroe case. It goes into, and in the book we talk about the, various governors, movie stars, people. Just they wanted material which gave them leverage on anybody. So I think the book makes a considered case for the prosecution. We say that with the evidence, we think we'd get a conviction from it. But I think it needs to be read further than the headline to get the full picture of the circumstances where this would happen. I think anybody is, I was going to say foolish. I suppose that's the right word. Anyone is foolish to accept anything is 100% certain. But I would think this is certainly in the high 90s of the circumstances of Marilyn Monroe's death, of actually what happened.
Douglas Thompson, author of Bombshell, The Night Bobby Kennedy Killed Marilyn Monroe. Thank you for joining us on the mother
thank you for having.
of all talk shows. Now, what's my next one? In 1776, the US Congress officially renamed the country the United States of America. What was it previously called? A, United Colonies, B, North America, C, United Territories? That's a hard one. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Now let me give you the phone numbers. If you're in the UK, the number is 08081 96 5522. It's entirely free nowadays. Ditto if you're in the United States. +1 844 944 3344.
They're looking up to the wrong role models, and that's what's causing them to get into gang culture and look up to folk that are stabbing and shooting each other.
That's why I love that picture on the front of The Voice of Sancho, of Sterling, of Saka, and of Rashford. I loved it because it showed young black boys, this is what you should aspire to.
Better than every other country.
Well, we are better than every other country.
Look in the mirror.
No, we are.
Not treated,
Well, tell me a country that's better.
Yeah, but that means nothing to me.
Well, it may not. It's a fair point.
That means nothing to me and my children. At the end of the day, that is a white man's problem, a white woman's problem. It's about time you stop ignoring it and denying it and deal with it. You're causing a lot of harm.
I'm causing a lot of harm. Thank you for that call.
But
I'm sympathetic, Kieran, to that point of view, and I'm fully seized of the fact that there is sexual fluidity openly expressed now in a way that there wasn't when I was young, and I have no animus towards even people that like sex with pans. I just won't allow my 4-year-old or my 7-year-old or my 10-year-old to be filled with this at school.
That is a straw man. You show me a single teacher that can teach a 4-year-old child about sex. If you can show me that, I will ring the police before you.
Well, you may not be aware.
Prove me.
Kieran, you may not be aware. Kieran, let me speak. You may not be aware of the story that broke this week. Kieran, please be quiet for a minute.
Moats is the best. Keep going, George. It's the only way.
God bless you. No, as long as I've got breath, I'll keep going.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Well, the previous name of the United States of America was the United Colonies. Who'd have thunk it? Now, should Prince Charles A, succeed? 31%. B, abdicate for William? 40%. C, make way for a president? Maybe President Tony Blair. Or I don't know, President Piers Morgan. Careful what you wish for. You can still vote. It's still running on my Twitter feed. Now, wherever you are watching this show, please take a second and hit the like button. It's really important that Mr. Algorithm knows how much you like this show. And please do share it. If you're on Facebook, please share it with all of your contacts. Now, how about this news on our podcast? Once again, thanks for downloading the podcast of this show. It's a kind of distilled version, shorn of all extraneous matter. We've broken our daily listener record again this week. We're now being listened to in 79 countries. We have listeners in Afghanistan. I wonder if we've still got them. Mexico, Peru, Gibraltar, and Russia. And the Moats podcast, get this, is now in the top 10% of all podcasts in the entire world. and we've been charting in Australia, Brazil, and Spain. So if you want to catch up on the podcast, I say it's a bite-sized version of this 3-hour show. It's available from tomorrow evening. You can download it from Apple Music, Spotify, Deezer, Anchor, or wherever you get your podcasts from. It says here. Now, the phone numbers, if you're in the United Kingdom, it's 08081 965522. That's 08081 965522. If you're in the United States, it's toll-free. It's free in Britain and the United States. And in the US, the number to call is +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. You can email the show at any time, onair@moats.tv. And don't forget that next Saturday, 9/11, I will be speaking in Leicester. Students go free. I'll show our critically acclaimed, I think I can truthfully say that, critically acclaimed film, Killing Kelly, which I made with the outstanding Irish film director, Sean Murray. We'll show the film, we'll answer questions on the film, and probably say something and answer questions about other burning political matters also. So it's in the Secular Hall in Leicester. Students go free. The details are everywhere. I'm not sure what time it starts, but you can go to ticketsource.co.uk/Killing Kelly. It's at 2:30. Let's take some calls. John in Dorset thinks I'm anti-American. Let's hear you. Go on, John.
I'm not sure whether you are personally, but I think generally, the consensus of the media seems to be that America is the Satan. Let me just say something before I start that. I've never heard anybody say murder better than a Scotsman. You were talking about Bobby Kennedy. I think there's something about it that adds a little bit chill factor to the action.
I'll tell you, John, before you go on, one incarnation of this show, the mother of all talk shows, was on a New York radio station called WBAI, operated out of Wall Street, of all places. And I used to present it every week. And every week, women would call up, and we assumed that they had a question to ask. And every week, these American women would say, I don't have a question, Mr. Galloway, but would you just say the word murder? And I would lean right up to the microphone and say, murder. And they loved it.
Well,
they'd giggle and run away.
Listen, all I wanted to say was that if I can paraphrase Winston Churchill, who said something like, democracy is probably the worst way of running a country, but it's better than all the rest.
Apart from all the others, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. I'm not very good at But, I mean, the thing is that about America, look, you know as well as I do, that there's probably about 29 Uncle Sams, and they're not all white, and they're not all called Uncle Sam. But basically, I just think that if you look around the world, if America fails, we're in big trouble.
Oh, really?
And that's my opinion.
Well, let's go through them seriatim,
Russia,
John. Let's go through the American failure in Vietnam. Of course, failure doesn't quite describe the murder of millions of people. A very large number of them women that look like my wife and children that look like my children. So the Vietnam War is very important to me. What about that American failure? Did the world fail because American failed in Vietnam?
Yeah, I think it was a terrible failure, and I wouldn't disagree at all. But what I'm saying is that looming on the horizon is the we're told that China are possibly going to take over from America. Now that sends. I mean, I won't be around, and I don't suppose any of my mates will. But for the rest of for the young folk, I think that is absolutely terrifying.
When you say take over, John, what do you mean take over?
Well, I mean, they'll be the richest. So whoever's got the most dough has got the most influence. Whoever's got the most influence, take over.
Well, you're right. China will one day soon be the biggest economy in the world, but I've yet to see any evidence that they want to take over. There's no Chinese bases, none at all, in foreign countries. China doesn't have military bases in Britain or all around the United States. Chinese warships are not sailing off the coast of Britain or the United States. It's the other way around.
Hong Kong.
Hong Kong is in China.
No, I'm saying that they're taking over Hong Kong, aren't they? Or
how can you take over your own country?
No, but I mean, it's very much like they do it, by means of the money. I don't think they're going with rifles yet, but I do think that they're going with their influence.
Well, that's the wrong example you gave. You could have given better examples, because Hong Kong was taken by us from China as punishment for their refusal to allow us to sell heroin on the streets of China. So if you're looking for a baddie in the Hong Kong story, that baddie is us.
I think, we would all, I think anybody who's at the top of the heap is terrible. Anybody who takes over, anybody who has any influence over anybody else's country is no good. We were no good. America was no good, and China is going to be worse.
Why worse? I'm still struggling as to where you get this conclusion worse. Worse how? The food would be better.
Well, I mean, I don't eat fruit bats, do you?
Well, Chinese food or hamburger, give me the Chinese food.
I don't even eat cricket bats.
But the point is, China so far, and you haven't given me any examples, isn't trying to take over anybody.
No, but they've taken over their entire country by means of being a totalitarian, so-called Chinese communist state. But I don't see that.
How can you take over your whole country, John?
Oh yeah, I mean the same as governments have taken us over. I mean, I'm a working class kid, and I've been taken over ever since the very first.
If you're a working class kid, you've been kidded. You've been kidded into believing that the guy over there is your enemy, when in fact the enemy is at home. John, thanks for the call. It was an excellent one. Excellent one. Eve is in Idaho. Let's hear from him. Eve, on you go.
Hello, George. I wanted to say 2 points about the Afghanistan debacle. One in particular and one in general. So the particular point is the following. You remember those terrible pictures which will be shown for a century of two young people falling down
from the airplane. Yes, I do, of course.
Yes. Now, I used to fly small airplane, and when you are in an airport, you are always in contact with the tower when you have an active tower, and those conversations are always automatically recorded for accident, if you cross a runway or something like that.
Yeah.
Now, what I demand from the Pentagon is to give the transcript of this recording between the pilot of this particular plane, which could not see the people hanging on the fairing of the plane, and the tower. The ground must have seen that the plane was dragging some people there, and at some point we must have here all short or so we must have those tapes. So what I demand from the Pentagon is to publish this tape, this recording from the tower and this particular plane.
Very good point, Eve. Very good point.
My second is that just like your great guest, I think his name is Major McBride.
Yes.
I try to define this whole Afghanistan thing, and I could not do it except by misquoting Winston Churchill. And I would say never in the history of United States conflict so much has been stolen by so few from so many.
That's pretty good, pretty poetic, Yves. Thanks very much for that call too. Basant is in New York. Let's hear from him.
Hello, George. Thanks for having me on again.
Welcome.
I just wanted to talk a bit about the floods and the rain we saw. Luckily, I wasn't affected much, though I know some people who unfortunately were. But I was outside just walking in the city on the day, on the afternoon it was about to happen, and there was no preparation. The subways were not closed, and later many subway cars were stranded in flooded stations. Like, roads were not closed.
Was there no forecast? There was no warning that there was about to be a year's worth of rain in an hour?
It was a very slow-moving storm. It was heading northeast over days. It had already caused, disaster in Louisiana. So the next day when I heard Schumer and Hochul and de Blasio and then even Biden, and all they would say is climate change after 20 or more people had died in the area. They would just bring up this nebulous concept that none of them had a solution to. I was really enraged because really hurricanes have always existed, and sure, it might increase their intensity and their regularity, but when you have a direct hit as New York faced, obviously there's going to be damage and possibly flooding. And instead of taking responsibility for this, as in the fires in California, they just blame this hazy construct. When the reality is natural disasters can be planned for and mitigated. And I didn't see any evidence of our local authorities doing that.
Very powerful indeed. Thank you very much for that update, Basant. Now, you can watch this show on Telegram Live. That's the latest of our platforms. Just visit t.me/George Galloway to subscribe to my Telegram channel. Of course, as I keep saying, if in the worst case scenario, if Mr. Al Go Rhythm goes totally berserk, Telegram might be the only place you can watch this program at the end of the day. Now, have I got a question? I've got one. It is, in 1956, Elvis Presley made his first appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show. Who compared the show? A, Sullivan, B, Charles Lawton, C, Roy Rogers. That is a fascinating question, the answer to which is after this short break.
Radio Sputnik.
Let's take a call. Go ahead, Kenny.
Hi, George. Yeah, I just want to talk about the trans issue that you were speaking about earlier. I've got a book in front of me by Douglas Murray, and he's got a paragraph here I'd just like to read out, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was standing on the corner at a quarter.
All right, I'll get him off. He's a nutter. In the UK, it's 08081 965 522, and in the US, it's +1 844 944 3344.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
For some reason, difficult to fathom, the Ed Sullivan Show, on which Elvis Presley made his first appearance, was compared by Charles Lawton. Wow. Where was Ed that night? Well, the answer is he'd been involved in a car crash. The main studio was in New York, but Presley performed from Hollywood. The first song, Don't Be Cruel to a Heart That's True. Great, great number. Now, the final numbers, I think, for the poll. Should Prince Charles A succeed? 31%, less than a third of you. B, abdicate for William? 40%. C, make way for a president? 29%. So the royalists have it. Perhaps it was the prospect of a President Tony Blair or President Joe Biden that terrified the people back to nurse, but they are indeed doing so. Now, back to the phone lines. Mohammed is in Manchester. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Hi, George. Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you very much. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I'm just, you know what, George? I'm a bit frustrated with the media because they pick and choose what to broadcast and when to broadcast it. If we go to Afghanistan, sort of broadcasting at the moment with what's going on, all the chaos that's going on over there, it's all very selective, the stuff that they're broadcasting for starters. And there's been chaos going on in Afghanistan for years and years and years, but they put it out the bag to broadcast it all to the public now. I mean, what are your thoughts on this, George?
Well, of course, you're right. It's a gigantic lie machine. And that's why I now have absolutely nothing to do with it. There was not much case for having anything to do with it hitherto, but after my experience in the Batley and Spen by-election, I just made the decision that I will never again answer questions from or appear on the mainstream media, not ever again, for lots of reasons other than that gigantic lie machine, because sometimes you can get on to a gigantic lying television station and score some goals. But I now have an audience exponentially bigger than the programs on the mainstream media. And whatever the multiple of exponential is to mainstream newspapers, a single tweet of mine will reach an exponentially larger number of people than an article in a rag like The Guardian or The Independent ever will. So A, I have no need to, and B, I have no wish to have anything to do with them. And I urge everyone watching and listening now to have nothing to do with this giant lie machine. Last word to you, Mohammed.
I think you put that all together very eloquently, George, and I'm on your side.
Thank you.
You should have got the Batley and Spen, and may you keep broadcasting the important news, the things that people can make a difference, and keep doing your thing, George.
Thank you. I'm very touched by that. I'll be in Batley tomorrow, God willing, and a big public meeting coming up there on the 14th of September. But first, it's Leicester, of course. That's next Saturday at 2:30 in the Secular Hall. Now, Tutin says, in California, they deem respect for a prisoner's gender identity of more importance than the safety of natural-born women in prison. They are housing pre-op transgenders whose crime includes rape as a man with women who have been women their whole lives. I can see the mountain of new requests submitted by male inmates who have no chance of parole to change their gender identity in hopes of being transferred to a women's facility. Complete craziness. Complete indeed. Tom says Major McBride, along with Julian Assange, Craig Murray, Edward Snowden, and many others, knowing what would happen to them, have shown great courage for our benefit. They all should be held in the highest esteem, and I believe that in the not too distant future, they will be. Very well said, Tom. The same Tom says, I would urge anyone who is interested to check Chris Hedges' on-contact interview with the authors of Bright Green Lies. Wow, you need to hear this. Eye-opener is an understatement. And Bushman says the Democrats are to blame for this identity politics insanity. It's made its way across the pond, on the so-called left are absorbing it. Joanne says, as an American, I would not wish on any country to have such a corrupt system as America, where you have to vote between Tweedledee and Tweedledum. No choice at all. Will Lyons says, all wars are started by a few greedy, powerful people for their own self-gain. They then use the media to brainwash people, using religion and hate to get people to do the dirty work for them. And Gerard White says, American intelligence, isn't that a double entendre? And Joseph Kay says, good men and brave men fought in World War II. You'd have to be a chump to join the army in today's world. And Neil Curry says, hence all the dumbing down they are attempting. According to Carl Sagan, writing in 1995, scientific illiteracy in the USA is at the level of slavery times, when giving books to black people was a crime. Let's take some more calls. Oh, there, we've got a new poll. Aren't they responsive, my colleagues through the glass? Who was the best of the Kennedys? A, Jack, B, Bobby, C, Ted. You can vote on my Twitter handle, on the YouTube channel that's showing this show right now. And if you're there, by the way, please subscribe. Or on my Telegram. Who was the best of the Kennedys? A, Jack, B, Bobby, C, Ted. Let's hear from Majid in Birmingham. Go ahead, Majid.
Hello, George. How are you?
Majid?
I'm really happy. Hello?
Yes, I've got you. Go on.
How are you, George? I'm really happy to hear you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I am the Iranian. Because you said that some country from Afghanistan, they listen to you. I just want to tell you, I'm Iranian, and many Iranians, they really, really love you, and we listen to you. And keep going, man.
I will, as long as God gives me breath. Yes.
And you are one of the most truly honest person I ever seen in the Western world, to be honest.
Thank you, brother. Thank you so much.
Because, look, always y'all just lying. Look, the American, the cowardly, they run away. They killed the General Soleimani because he was fighting with the ISIS. So, I don't know. Keep going, man. I really, really love you.
I
and
give
not just
you...
me, and many Iranians that love you.
Thank you, brother. I give you that solemn and binding promise. As long as God gives me breath, I will continue to fight for what I believe in. I may be right, I may be wrong, but you will always know that these are my sincerely held views. No one purchased them, no one rented them, no one can intimidate me out of them. I would sooner die than to succumb to any of those things. And pretty much on all the big questions, I've been right. I was wrong once, around about 1976, 77, but I've forgotten what that was about now. In the last hour, we will have the wonderful Rachel Blevins from America and the Right Honourable Norman Baker, my former parliamentary colleague, a Lib Dem MP and a former minister in David Cameron's government. I think he may also have been in Theresa May's government, but I may have got that wrong. The news with Jamie Lowe coming up now.
Radio Sputnik News.
Vaccine passports will be required at the end of the month in nightclubs and other indoor venues in England, the vaccine minister has confirmed. Nadeem Zahawi said it was the right time to start the scheme for sites with large crowds, as well as over 18s will have been offered 2 jabs by then. Asking people to show certificates with COVID vaccination proof has been criticised by venues and some MPs. However, Zahawi said it would ensure that the economy could remain open. He added, quote, "One thing that we have learned is that in large gatherings of people, especially indoors, the virus tends to spike and spread." Zahawi also indicated the government's plans to offer a COVID booster jab to most vulnerable people, including all over 50s, could get the go-ahead at the end of the month. He said extending the vaccine rollout to 12 to 15-year-olds would absolutely be the right thing to do if the UK's chief medical officers recommended it. A former aide to the Prince of Wales has temporarily stepped down from his role as chief executive of the Prince's Foundation charity amid allegations that he used his influence to help secure an honour for a major donor. Michael Fawcett has been accused of offering to help a wealthy Saudi businessman with an honour. Mahfouz Marai Mubak bin Mahfouz received an honorary CBE in 2016. The Prince's Foundation said it was investigating the matter. The organisation is an umbrella group for a number of Prince Charles's charitable interests. Claims about Fawcett's conduct were published in the Sunday Times and Mail on Sunday today. The Sunday Times said Mahfouz, who denies any wrongdoing, donated large sums to restoration projects of particular interest to Prince Charles. Fawcett is alleged to have coordinated support for an honour. The head of Britain's armed forces said that everybody had got it wrong on how quickly the Taliban would take over Afghanistan. General Sunic Carter told the BBC it was the pace of it that surprised us, and I don't think we realised quite what the Taliban were up to. Asked whether military intelligence was wrong, he said the government received intelligence from a variety of sources. Quote, "It's not purely about military intelligence," he said. The last British and US troops left Afghanistan a week ago, bringing their 20-year military campaign in the country to an end. There has been criticism of the way the West withdrew from Afghanistan, with questions over how the Taliban was able to seize control of the country at such speed. Taliban militants in Afghanistan have shot dead a policewoman in a provincial city, relatives have claimed. The woman, named in a local media report as Banu Nagar, was killed at the family home in front of relatives in Firozkoh, the capital of Central Ghor province. The killing comes amid increasing reports of escalating repression of women in Afghanistan. Details of the incident are still sketchy, as many in Firozkoh fear retribution if they speak out. Relatives supplied graphic images showing blood spattered on a wall in the corner of a room and a body, the face heavily disfigured. One report suggested Nagar, who worked at the local prison, was 8 months pregnant. Saudi Arabia says it has intercepted 3 missiles and 3 drones fired by Houthi rebels in neighbouring Yemen. One was destroyed over the eastern city of Dammam, where falling shrapnel injured 2 children and damaged buildings, the Defence Ministry has said. The Houthis, who frequently mount such cross-border attacks, said they had targeted Saudi oil facilities. The other attacks were aimed at oil sites in the southern provinces of Jizan and Najran, the group said. In 2019, the rebels claimed responsibility for a drone attack on 2 facilities run by Saudi state-owned oil company Aramco. It temporarily reduced crude oil production by 5.7 million barrels a day, about half the kingdom's output at the time. Saudi Arabia entered the Yemen war in 2015 on the side of the internationally recognised government shortly after the Houthis seized the capital, Sana'a. The fate of Guinea's president, Alpha Condé, is unclear after an unverified video showed him in the hands of soldiers who said they had staged a coup. However, the defence minister has been quoted as saying an attempted takeover had been thwarted. This follows hours of heavy gunfire near the presidential palace in the capital, Conakry. Soldiers are patrolling the otherwise deserted streets of the city centre. In the video, the soldiers from a unit of elite special forces ask President Condé to confirm he is unharmed, but he refuses to respond. They say that all their land and air borders have been closed and the government dissolved. The Girls Aloud singer Sarah Harding, who had breast cancer, died on Sunday morning, aged 39, her mother has said. Harding announced in August 2020 that she had been diagnosed with the disease, which had spread to other parts of her body. Earlier this year, Harding revealed that doctors had told her she would not see another Christmas. And finally, a team of researchers from the University of Geneva has hauled a huge laser to a mountain top to shoot it at the sky and act as a high-tech lightning rod. The team is led by Jean-Pierre Wolf, a Swiss physicist who's been working with lasers for 20 years and has been particularly fascinated with attempting to control the weather with them. Lasers create very narrow, high-energy beams of light. Applications range from cutting diamonds to surgery to reading barcodes, and Wolf believes he can add another to the list, protecting us from lightning. After a year of delays due to the pandemic, the laser has been transported to the summit of Santis, a mountain in the Swiss Alps with an elevation of 8,200 feet. Quote, "This is one of the places in Europe that's struck by lightning the most," he explained. There is a radio transmission tower there which gets struck 100 to 400 times a year, so it's an ideal place to make our proof of concept experiments. Traditional lightning rods are only able to protect a limited area on the ground, no matter how high they are built. Wolf hopes that the laser will help protect a larger area on the ground, although he can't say yet how much larger. The theory is that the laser can act both as a lightning rod, catching bolts that would strike anyway, and also trigger extra ones. Quote, "That would mean we would be unloading the thundercloud, reducing its voltage, and then preventing further lightning strikes in the surrounding area," said Wolf. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Rachel Blevins coming up, and then the Right Honourable Norman Baker, but much of the final hour will be given over to you and your calls and your voluminous social media prognostications. Who was the best of the Kennedys? A, Jack, 43%. B, Bobby, 43%. A dead heat, if you'll forgive the pun. C, Ted, 14%. You can vote on my YouTube, on my Telegram, and above all, on my Twitter. That will run more or less to the end of the show. Now, no show is complete nowadays without hearing from across the pond my dear colleague and wonderful up-and-coming broadcaster, and one day I predict a politician too. She's Rachel Blevins. Remember her name. Rachel, welcome. So good to see you again. I'm sorry to go on about him, but I've just noticed that Melania Trump has started a new Twitter account. So she's not banned, even if her husband is. How long will it be before Donald is snatching the phone from her hand and tweeting in her name, I wonder? But speculation is mounting that the Orange Man is going to run again in 2024. What say you?
Yeah, the question seems to be not if he will run, but when he will announce that he's running. And it really is interesting to see, you know, with this 2024 field, we've even got polls already saying that if it comes down to Trump and Biden once again, then Trump could take the win on that one. You know, in terms of where social media is going to be in all of this, I think we're also going to have to ask ourselves the question of just how much the mainstream media and those big tech giants want to get out of this. Because when it comes to Donald Trump, no matter how offensive they claim that he is, the reality is that he makes them a lot of money and gets them a lot of traffic. So when it comes to, you know, mainstream media networks like CNN and Fox News, they've seen their ratings struggle as a result of Trump not being in office, Trump not being on social media, them not getting to talk about him. And when it comes to Twitter and Facebook, they're really going to have to ask themselves the questions. And we could actually see some backpedaling. We know with Facebook, they haven't made their final decision just yet. And we could even see Twitter kind of backpedal just to say, hey, actually, maybe we shouldn't be banning the president or even past president of the United States from our platform.
Or future president, because if he ever becomes president again, he might do something about us. But it's a strange situation where the Taliban have a blue tick Twitter account, but the president, as was and may be again, is still banned off Twitter. That's pretty bizarre, isn't it?
That it is. And I know it kind of brings up a lot of the complaints that there have been with these big tech giants like Facebook, like Twitter, the ones that, say that they need to go after certain political figures and they need to silence them. But at the same time, you ask yourself, whenever it comes to a lot of extremist content, or, you're thinking about like ISIS videos and that sort of things, those things that are shared on social media, they're being shared on Twitter and Facebook. And so it constantly begs the question of what they're really actually concerned about whenever they claim that they have to go above and beyond to silence certain political figures like Trump, like independent journalists, but at the same time, they don't actually go against the violent content that can be found all around on their platforms.
Now, not a crime, of course, although a crime by omission, perhaps, was the devastation caused in New York with the flooding last week. The infrastructure, which is crumbling in the United States, as indeed it is here in Britain. We've got plenty of money for war, but not enough for the drains. How bad was it in New York, Rach?
It was pretty bad. I know there were a lot of videos going all around. There's likely millions of dollars in damage. And we have to remember that this stretch all the way from New York down to Louisiana, where there's still millions of people that are still struggling to gain access to power. And it hit Louisiana on the anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, which was another devastating storm. And it does serve as a reminder that Congress really needs to get on it when it comes to infrastructure and actually focusing on this country, because the reality is that, yes, when it comes to Mother Nature, there's only so much you can do, right? We're going to expect hurricanes. And with the way that the United States is going, we're going to expect weather to get more and more drastic every single year. But when it comes to that all too important infrastructure, that doesn't really seem to be their focus at all, even though they claim, that they want to throw around billions of dollars in infrastructure spending. Well, at the same time, there's also a movement in Congress to increase the United States defense budget, to increase military spending by $24 billion next year. And the Biden administration didn't even ask for that. They wanted to keep it normal right around $715 billion for next year alone. But there's a movement largely of Democrats that is pushing to increase spending to $740 billion, all while they're sitting there claiming, hey, we ended the Afghanistan war. You would think that that would make spending go down a little bit, or that would move the funds over towards things that the American people actually need to deal with. But no, instead, they just want more money all around, it seems like.
So the president and the defense secretary didn't ask for extra money, but the Democrat-controlled Congress is forcing them to accept it.
Yeah, that is exactly right. And what kind of world would we be in where this was the case, that after 20 years of this so-called war on terrorism, now you've got Congress on board with looking at the next front, because they're wanting to take that additional money and spend it on new aircrafts and new materials. And it really should make the American people wonder, which far too many of them don't actually hear about it, but it should make them wonder what in the world their Congress is doing when they're sitting here dealing with natural disasters, dealing with their infrastructure falling apart. And yet all of these elected politicians are just sitting in Washington saying, hey, you know who needs more money? The military.
I know who needs more money. Hunter Biden. I saw the president of the Ukraine sitting with Joe Biden. Joe was asleep, of course, as is his wont when visiting statesmen come calling. Actually, maybe he had the right idea with the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of Ukraine. Perhaps sleeping through what they have to say isn't a bad idea. But the President of the Ukraine seemed very familiar with the Biden family. Familiar enough to tweet a list of financial demands. Are they going to be met? Is the American taxpayer going to throw still more money into the Ukraine? And how much of it comes back to the Biden family and other bloodsuckers?
You know, it is more likely than not that those demands are not only going to be met, but that the American people aren't even going to have any idea about it, because that's kind of what brings the media coverage into all of it, what they choose to cover and what they choose not to cover. And when it comes to someone like Hunter Biden, when it comes to the Biden family, that's not a topic the media really wants to touch on, because they don't want to get themselves into another one of those, you know, Hillary Clinton laptop hyperloops where they're talking about it over and over again. And I think for the Biden family, they're lucky in the sense that Ukraine is kind of one of those close U.S. allies that Congress is going to continue to help out, continue to pour money into no matter what. You know, when it comes to a new military aid package for, say, $60 million, they're all about that. They're good with that. And that's something that works in their favor. And I think when it comes to, you know, the media coverage of all of this, now that they're looking at Donald Trump most likely definitely making a run in 2024, then they have to kind of soften the blow when it comes to any possible criticism of Joe Biden, of his family, because they're looking at another race between the two of them and wondering if it's possible if Biden is actually going to lose to Trump instead of it being the other way around.
Trust me, Biden won't be the candidate in 24. I don't want to be unpleasant, but you wouldn't send him out to buy a loaf. Never mind let him run again in 2.5 years from now. Somebody else that's not needing money is Rachel Maddow. She of the takes onion from pocket, takes handkerchief from other pocket, dabs one's eyes. She's always breaking into tears at Donald Trump, at the withdrawal from Afghanistan and so on. She's just got a bumper new contract. Eat your heart out, Rachel. $30 million a year for reading the news.
That is crazy. I mean, that, especially when you have to remember that Rachel Maddow is the same person who sat there and told the world that Russia was going to attack our power grid in the dead of winter and that millions of Americans were going to freeze. She sat there and put that out there as an actual warning. They allowed that to run on the airwaves, and then now she's getting rewarded with an even new, even bigger contract than ever before. And I think part of what's so crazy about it is you think about the fact that, you know, here in the United States, they'll run these polls every single year where they talk about how many Americans trust the media as a whole. And every single year they keep getting lower and lower. And this is Democrats and Republicans both saying they do not trust the media. They do not trust these networks like the one that Rachel Maddow represents. And yet they have no problem handing her $30 million. I mean, that something doesn't compute there. That should make the American people start wondering how it's possible that at a time when their trust isn't in these mainstream networks, they continue to be so incredibly profitable.
As our colleague Lee Camp pointed out, this business could be summarized thus. Media houses worth $10 billion pay $10 million, in Rachel's case, much more than that, to television hosts to convince people on $100,000 that the people on $10,000 are the problem. I thought that brilliantly summed up the American media scene, and indeed, to a great extent, the British media scene. But the good news is people are switching off and switching over, aren't they? CNN's on the floor. CNNBC is on the floor. The future's not great for these platforms.
You would hope so. And I think that especially as we see, for those of us where, you know, we continue to build our presence on social media, because social media has been the biggest thing that has worked in our favor of people actually being able to turn off the TV, to get on YouTube, to watch live streams, to get on Twitter, to see what's actually happening instead of just what all of these talking heads tell them is happening. And I think that that's why there is such a push, not only for all of our voices to be allowed on social media, but for it to stop restricting those voices, because that's when people are actually able to see what's what's out there. And it presents this incredibly important narrative shift, especially at a time when, we're watching Congress want to increase the defense budget. Well, there's a good chance that they're going to start pushing for, if not a new war, then some new kind of bombing, like in Afghanistan, whenever the Biden administration was the one standing there saying, hey, we bombed Afghanistan. It was super successful. We took out what they referred to as an ISIS-K facilitator. Yet you get on social media and then you actually get to see real people talking, questioning why 10 civilians were killed, including 6 children, questioning not only why they were taken out, but why the Biden administration was so quick to just shrug it off and say, oh, yeah, we got a member of ISIS-K. That would not have happened if you didn't allow that discourse. And in other times, people would just have to rely on what was said on TV or printed on the newspaper, and they would just shrug it off and say, oh, well, clearly the United States is going after terrorists, when that's not always the case.
Well, with all respect to all other forms of media, plays and books and radio for that matter, film is the most important of the media. And on your social media output, you make brilliant use of video. It's fine. I do it all the time, writing pungent or even purple prose. And it goes so far. But video, film, goes far further, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And I appreciate that. I think that is one of those cases where it, in the media industry, they always joke and they say, well, if it bleeds, it leads, which is to say that the audience wants to see something. They want to actually see something that provokes some sort of emotion in them. And all too often, if you turn on the TV, what you're seeing is something that is going to lead to more and more fear. They want to stoke the fear. They want to stoke the divide among the public so that they will keep tuning in. But I think the power of social media and the power of what we're able to put out there is to remind people that it's okay to have a conversation. It's okay to question the narrative that's being put out there. And in fact, they should want to question that narrative, and they should want to actually see the on-the-ground footage. And, I really hope that this continues to create a movement that goes on far longer than you and I are around to be able to talk about.
Well, you'll be around for a long time, by the grace of God. Follow Rachel Blevins, if you're not already, on Twitter and online. Rachel, thank you very much, as always, for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Now, who was the best of the Kennedys? Jack, 44. Bobby, 44. It's a dead heat. On YouTube, Jack, 50. Bobby, 33. Ted, 17. On Telegram, Jack, 39. Bobby, 39. Wow. Ted, 22. You see, the Telegram viewers are the more discerning. Because if I was voting in this poll, my vote would be for Ted Kennedy, who would have been a truly great American president, I believe. Let's take Thomas in South Texas. Go ahead, Thomas.
Hi, George. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well. Thank you.
Awesome. Huge fan, first. Huge fan of your work, of your just great takes on geopolitics. And I'm also a great fan. I'm a great fan of RT and Sputnik. I think y'all do great work.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I just want to ask you, I know you were somewhat, I say somewhat, in a very generous sense, you were somewhat close to former Iraqi President Hussein. You really defended him, obviously, and I do think he did a lot of great stuff, and I think toppling him was obviously, objectively, probably one of the worst sins of the West in the 21st century. I am curious why you are so quick to defend Saddam Hussein and yet chastise other Arab leaders like Muammar Gaddafi, who, in my view, Gaddafi was one of the greatest statesmen of the 20th and 21st centuries. He made the second poorest country in Africa to the richest country in Africa. He lifted so many people out of poverty. So I want to know why you chastised him so harshly, or at least in the past chastised him so harshly.
Well, first of all, you're quite wrong to say that I was somewhat close, as you, I think, delicately put it, to Saddam Hussein. I met Saddam Hussein twice in my entire life, the same number of times that Donald Rumsfeld met Saddam Hussein. The difference was that Donald Rumsfeld met Saddam Hussein to sell him guns and gas and to give him maps, the better to target them with, whilst I met Saddam Hussein to try and bring about an end to the suffering of sanctions and war on Iraq. I did not defend Saddam Hussein, I defended Iraq, and I am very proud to have done so. I would have been proud in any case, but when I see the utter carnage and chaos that has been cascaded around the world by the invasion and occupation and destruction of Iraq, yes, I'm proud to say that I gave every breath that I had to try and stop the United States and my own government committing the blunders and crimes that they went on to commit. And every single day, I feel more vindicated in the defense of Iraq that I made. As for Muammar Gaddafi, I'm not his number one fan. Libya was a very small country with a very small population. When he took power, just 2 million of people, sitting on top of an ocean of oil. So it was not difficult to make Libya rich. But the richness of Libya compared to the rest of Africa is not the question. The rest of Africa was not a population of 2, 3, 4 million by the end, on top of an ocean of oil. The real question, therefore, is why was Libya not richer than it should have been? Why was it not richer than it was? Given the amount of oil wealth, many trillions of dollars of oil wealth harvested by Gaddafi and his state, every Libyan should have been a multi-millionaire. Libya should have, in its public infrastructure and its public realm, looked like Dubai. But neither of these two things is true. Off the main highway in Tripoli under Gaddafi, there were unpaved roads. There were roads with no streetlights. People had to go abroad with money from Gaddafi, sure, for medical treatment, for education. But Libya could have had the world's best hospitals and the world's best universities, but it didn't. That's my point. But if you ask me, which I infer from your question, you're asking me, was it right for NATO to back the jihadist mobs that murdered him after sodomizing him with an iron bar? Was it right for NATO to support Al-Qaeda against Gaddafi? Of course, the answer is a resounding no. I opposed the war on Libya. I opposed the strategy of building up the Islamist opposition to Gaddafi. And if you're asking me, and I'm going to infer that you are, is Libya better today after Gaddafi than it was before? Well, I don't even have to answer that. Only a madman, only a lunatic would claim that today's Libya and Libyans are better off than they were before the overthrow of Gaddafi. We have all paid a very high price for the disaster of Western policy towards Libya. So you get what I see as the truth. I will not hail Gaddafi as Lenin or even as Saddam. I will not pretend that he was a great and philosophic leader. He was not. And it takes some doing, you know, to make Libya worse, much, much worse now than it was under Gaddafi. Let's go to Rick in Michigan. Go ahead, Rick.
Hey, George, how are you? It's Rick in Michigan.
Nice to hear from you. Go ahead, sir.
Originally, I was born in Birmingham, England, Dudley Road Hospital.
Wow.
But, 78.
You've picked up the Michigan bar.
Well, I've been here since 86, so.
You should have done by now, yeah. Go ahead.
But I've been, I come back and forth to Birmingham, here and there whenever I can. But I was going to ask you, Senator Levin, he was at your Senate hearing, he's from Michigan, obviously, as you know, and his father, Sander Levin, they're Michigan reps. And obviously Carl just passed. So I didn't hear, what are your thoughts on his passing? I mean, I think he was more
my religion precludes me speaking ill of the recently dead, but I'll make an exception in his case. He was part of the corrupt Washington establishment that tried to put me on trial. More fool them. It ended differently to the ending they expected. I put them on trial. They were the ones found guilty. History has absolved me and will every day absolve me more clearly and every day condemn the Washington establishment more and more clearly. Last word to you, Rick.
No, I mean, it was a great hearing. I mean, you told them what they needed to hear.
Thank you.
I think Senator Levin was more on your side, but,
Well, he was at least listening and looking whilst Coleman was shuffling his non-existent papers and pretending to be busy on other matters. Thanks, Rick. From Dudley to Michigan. How extraordinary, I must say. Now, last question, I think, of the evening. In 1943, Italy surrendered unconditionally to the Allies. What happened to Mussolini 4 days later? A, executed. B, put on trial. C, freed by the Germans. Very good question. The answer is coming up.
Radio Sputnik.
Peter says the Afghan people have lost, George. I thought you were better than this, to be honest. Give me a call, Peter. Tell me what you mean. And Oliver says, for some reason, George was on the jihadist side when it came to Yugoslavia. And that's the reason I will never trust him. I fought against the war on Yugoslavia with all my breath and all my heart. Me and Tony Benn and Jeremy Corbyn and others were practically the only people in this country opposing the war on Yugoslavia, the destruction of Yugoslavia. How dare you, you imbecile? If you have any guts, you'll pick up the phone right now and call this show and justify that utter slander. Really. And Yoda says, love the show. best entertainment and education on the airwaves.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
In 1943, Italy surrendered unconditionally to the Allies. And 4 days later, Mussolini was freed by the Germans. Fooled you. Who was the best of the Kennedys? Jack, 41. Bobby, 46. Ted, 13%. There's a very, very close result there on all three platforms. You've still got 15 minutes or so to vote. Now, it's Sunday, so there's another royal scandal in the newspapers. One man who keeps a forensic eye on royal finances is my former parliamentary colleague, the Right Honourable Norman Baker, who joins us now, and I'm grateful. Norman, as always, I know you've got your own radio show on a Sunday night, so thanks for fitting us in. The case on the face of it is unanswerable. The fool Fawcett put down on paper that which you and I know is usually corruptly mumbled into ears in the corridors of gentlemen's clubs around St. James's.
Yes, indeed so, George. And if you look at the letter which was published in the paper today, it not only links the giving of an honour and the support for citizenship with money coming into the prince, but it talks about what might happen in the future. So there's no question, I'm afraid, that it seems to me an open and shut case, which is why I have written to the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Cressida Dick, asking her to start an investigation for what appears to me to be prima facie evidence that an offence has been committed under the 1925 Honours Act.
I agree entirely it's an open and shut case, and I agree entirely it's a very clear offence under the Act. The question is, who did the offending? Mr. Fawcett, the Prince's right-hand man, or the Prince himself?
Well, you know, of course, Prince Charles has been busy trying to put distance between himself and Michael Fawcett today. Not me, Gov, appears to be the line from Clarence House. We all know that Prince Charles and Michael Fawcett are Tweedledum and Tweedledee, or if you prefer something more literal, Achilles and Patroclus. That's what they are. And nothing that Michael Fawcett will have been done without Prince Charles's say-so. Now, we know before when Prince Charles was found to be allowing the selling of gifts which had been given to raise money, Michael Fawcett fell on his sword back then. Michael Fawcett has a habit of resigning and a habit of being brought back in when no one's looking. And this is that's the attempt now, which is happening, the so-called investigation by the Prince's Foundation. I mean, what a joke. At what point do people say this law a judge and jury in their own court? There's no investigation there at all. What will happen is Michael Fawcett will get wrapped up with the knuckles, he'll disappear for a while, and when no one's looking, Prince Charles will bring him back. At least that's the intention. And it's part of our job, I think, and I say our job, those who believe in democracy and proper process, to make sure that doesn't happen.
Now, it's the poor monarch, of course, has had to suffer the slings and arrows of press coverage of her sons. Her daughter appears mercifully to live a better life. But this is particularly damning, not because Prince Andrew's actions were not themselves serious, but he's not going to be the king. If, God forbid, Her Majesty was to pass this very evening, 1 second after she passed, Prince Charles would be king.
Well, technically not 1 second after. Technically, there has to be a Privy Council meeting to approve that. And by the way,
you'd need to be at it.
Yes. There's a Privy Council meeting held in secret with a small number of people like the Prime Minister. There's then a gathering when we all acclaim Prince Charles, to which I shall be invited. I just suppose I'll ask my opinion at that point, but I'm very happy to give
You can always shout
that.
it out, Norman.
Well, I may do. But in any case, you're perfectly true. The Queen has done her best over the years. She's relatively scandal-free, I think it's fair to say. And she's been landed with the disaster that's Prince Andrew, dodgy prince par excellence. She's got Harry and Meghan bleating over from the other side of the Atlantic, and now she's got her heir to the throne, who is up to his neck in, well, sleaze. That's the old-fashioned word, George. You'll know it, sleaze, or we prefer a different word, corruption.
Yeah, sleaze is the euphemism. It is actual corruption. If you are selling knighthoods for money, what is that but corruption?
Indeed, and if you just look at the other aspect of this, the idea that money would come in for the Prince's good cause in return for support for an application for citizenship. Does that ring a bell to you? Can I tell you what it reminds me of? It's when I asked my parliamentary question back in 2001. I think you were in the comments at the time, and it revealed that Peter Mandelson had been chasing the Hinduja brothers for money for the Millennium Dome and supporting their application for citizenship by way of a return favour. And he had to resign, if you recall. Now, Prince Charles, no doubt, won't be resigning, but he ought to.
Yeah, we can accept that some people can be fools and some knaves, and some are both fools and knaves. Mandelson is very definitely a knave, but not a fool. He didn't write a letter to the Hindujas saying, give me money and I'll give you a passport.
No, he wrote a letter to the Home Office, which is what came out from my parliamentary question. So he did actually leave a trail. But I mean, look, Prince Charles is up to his neck in this, and there's no point in him trying to pretend that Michael Fawcett is unknown to him. Those two are inextricably linked. And the questions, I think, on this affair are not for Michael Fawcett, they are for Prince Charles.
Yes. Do you think Cressida Dick will investigate this, as you're going to be asking her to do tomorrow?
Well, I have actually asked her today. I've actually written, because I had a spare hour, so I wrote to her this afternoon and asked her to do that and put the case. And the letter, I think, will be, the intention is to publish in the Sun tomorrow, the letter I've written to Cressida Dick. She ought to investigate it because on the face of it, there's an offence being committed. And without being grand about it, I am a Privy Councillor, and she ought to be listening to what I'm saying about these matters. I am there to advise the Queen officially, and I'm advising Cressida Dick that there's an offence being committed. So she ought to look into it. However, the Metropolitan Police studiously failed to look into the allegations made against Prince Andrew, although they were allegedly committed in this country. And at that time, the benefit of the doubt had to be given to the victim. That was the official Metropolitan Police line. It didn't seem to apply to Prince Andrew. So I think there is a reluctance in the Metropolitan Police to date to pursue matters where the royal family is involved. But you know, George, we are all equal before the law, even Prince Charles.
Well, yes, until he becomes king, and at which point he becomes the law. This wonderful book that you wrote, I can't speak highly enough of it. And what do you do? Brilliantly zeroes in on the finances. Follow the money. That's what you have done. You can balk at the flumery and the privilege and the unelected power and so on. But when you follow the money, you find corruption, sleaze, malfeasance on really quite a grand scale. Laws are deliberately written or not written to financially benefit the crown. You've got it all in your book.
Well, yes, I think I have, George. And the fact of the matter is the royal family believes it can be immune from any sort of public accountability. It thinks it's arrogant enough to believe it can get away with it, and because it has got away with it to date. But it should be held to account. The Queen and all the members of the royal family who receive public money are public servants. That's what they are. Just the same as MPs, members of the House of Lords, councillors, people who work in the public sector, in the NHS or anything else. They work for the public with public money and need to be accountable for it, and they're not. And I hope what will come out of my book and come out of episodes like this is the eyes of the public being opened to what's being done in their name.
More power to your elbow and your pen. Right Honourable Norman Baker, thank you for joining us. I'd like to be a fly on the wall at that Privy Council when Norman gets the chance to query the elevation to the monarchy of Prince Charles. How's the poll going? Who's the best of the Kennedys? Jack, 41, Bobby, 46, Ted, 13. He's moving up after my endorsement. Chris in Colchester. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi.
Hi.
I just wondered if you'd seen Noam Chomsky in an interview had said that the unvaccinated should be forced into isolation.
Well, on an island somewhere?
No, at home, or what, you know, just whatever, basically.
That's rather draconian from the great champion of freedom. Where did he make this statement, Chris?
It was in an interview, I think it was a month or two ago, but Max Blumenthal had posted the clip of it on Twitter. So I saw it, it was quite disturbing.
I think he's losing it, old Chomsky. I must say he's looking more and more like the wild man of the woods, and that is wildly off the beam, that take. Thanks, Chris, for that. Kevin in Lancashire is up next. Go ahead, Kevin.
Well, it's about the question you pose for people. Which is the best of the Kennedys?
Yeah.
I think the question should be, which is the worst of the Kennedys?
Well, you can vote either way. I mean, just reverse.
Well, the other ones were for killing Marilyn, weren't they?
Well, that's what the author claimed. I must say, he didn't persuade me that Bobby Kennedy, with his own hand, killed Marilyn Monroe. But it's an interesting theory.
No, they didn't do it with their own hand. They aren't brave enough. They paid someone to do it. All them people pay someone.
Why do you hate them so much, Kevin?
Hate them? I don't hate them. I just want the truth to come out. They killed Marilyn, you know. I think they killed Marilyn, don't you?
I don't actually. No, I don't.
How many women was he shagging? He was into them all. And the drug addicts as well, weren't he? It was on speed, you reckon? Kennedy.
You know an awful lot more than me about the private habits of leaders in the United States.
There was his father, the ambassador to England from Ireland, who supported Germany in the war. Don't you know about that?
Of course,
supported Germany, Jack Kennedy.
Of course, I know about that. But the Kennedys,
Germany to beat England in the war.
What about his son that gave his life in the war? What about his other son, Jack, that almost gave his life in the war, that sustained life-altering injuries for his service in the fight against fascism in the war? Is that not worth mentioning, Kevin, in your little rant?
Well, no. If they kill Marilyn, they should pay for it and get a bad name for it. Is all. Him being the president,
are you a big fan of Marilyn Monroe?
I don't think she should have been murdered, do you?
I don't believe that she was murdered, but we're going round in circles, Kevin. I need to go on. Ian is in Hounslow. Go ahead, Ian.
Hello, George. I just wanted to talk about the no jab, no job policy that's been brought in for care homes. Now, this is dystopian. By now, most staff and residents have been vaccinated, and the care sector struggled heroically against insurmountable odds after basic being dumped on completely by the current administration. And now they're treating these people like that. And I think it could collapse. I think people will just walk away. I think they've just about had enough.
Well, no, I think you said most of the care home staff are already vaccinated, and I think that's true.
But it's a slur and an insult to them after the struggle in the face of the bungling from the central government. Boris has done this to be seen to be doing something when he's done nothing except get the vaccine done. Everything else he's failed at.
That's like saying Winston Churchill did nothing except win the Second World War. I mean, getting the vaccine out was a rather important thing, wasn't it, Ian?
Well, I mean, he got something right, but had he done things correctly at the right time, this nation wouldn't have been in the state it got itself into.
That I agree
He took
with.
a chance.
That I agree with entirely. Thanks for that call. Michael is in New York. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Michael.
Hi, George.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, by the grace of God. Thank you.
That's good. That's good. I had a question about Afghanistan. The retreat, the withdrawal of U.S. forces.
Yeah.
In America, or in the U.S. domestic media, like mass media, like network and the cable. Whenever they have any, quote, experts on, they were the people who basically started the war back in under Bush.
Yeah.
And it was funny because I was listening to Ralph Nader's Radio Hour, and I quite like him for his honesty. Good guy is, pardon me, Lieutenant Lawrence Wilkerson, who was under Colin Powell during that time, said that he was being disturbed by the presence of those people on the news, like General Petraeus and others, perpetuating a sort of stabbed in the back narrative.
Yeah.
About the Afghanistan war.
That's right.
He found that frightening, and I do as well. I was wondering what.
I think I didn't know that someone had put it that way, still less a military man of note. But that's exactly what they are doing. They are fostering a stab in the back narrative. And we know in Weimar Germany where that stab in the back narrative led. It led to the triumph of fascism and the plunging of the whole world into cataclysmic war, causing the deaths of almost 100 million people around the world and changing the world forever. So it's a dangerous narrative. I prefer Major McBride's comments earlier in this show that this entire war was a big lie, and that everyone who gave their life's blood for it died for a lie. Everyone that sweat paid for the enrichment and the profit of those who grew fat and rich off the backs of this 20-year war did so based on a lie. But it is possible, and I'm one of those who does, to have been completely against this war, to be completely in favor of ending it, and still believe that the way that Biden ended it, the chronology of the ending of it, was a series of easily foreseeable, catastrophic blunders. That's where I stand. Michael, last word to you.
Well, you mentioned Weimar, and what's also interesting with this, coupled with this stabbed in the back kind of narrative, the U.S. government basically, because of led by the Democrats, is turning the war on terrorism far more domestically, even though it's been domestic with the curtailing civil rights and whatnot.
The Patriot Act and so on, yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, now they're talking about homegrown violent extremists.
Yeah.
And they want us to narc on each other, basically.
Yeah.
And within one of the manuals I read, it kept warning this is not enough. Any of these lists are not enough for for a police officer or any kind of officer to go detain a suspect or anything, but a reporting of it is. You know?
Well, look, Michael, just because of the hour, I need to go. Thanks for that great call. From one Michael to another, this one in Sydney, Australia. Go ahead, Michael.
Oh, hi, George.
Hi.
Look, Hey, I just like to say, picking up on what the guest from Australia said earlier about Australia. I mean, like, this is the country that pioneered the imprisoning and basically mental torture of refugees on deserted islands, after we destroyed their countries, and then they came here and we treated them like criminals. No, I'm not saying we should have open borders, but we're having the same problem here in Afghanistan, in Australia. Well, no one wants to take the Afghan refugees. I think we're only taking something like 5,000, a measly 5,000, after we helped destroy that country. There are photos of Australian SAS soldiers drinking beer out of the prosthetic legs of a person they executed. There's a war crime. They took a trophy, alleged war crime anyway. Yet to be proven, and probably won't be. It's also the country that the citizen of Julian Assange is rotting away in Belmarsh. I mean, did anyone really expect anything different from this country? In the 1990s, we had a politician, Pauline Hanson. She started this racist scapegoating of the Chinese, saying they're coming here, buying up all our stuff. I think no one should be able to buy our water. I think no one should be able to buy our electricity grid. I don't think any country should be able to buy basic infrastructure of a country.
No, including China or anyone.
Including China, exactly.
Yeah. Michael, look, I need to go, Michael. I beg your pardon. Norma did ring in, but she's not feeling that great, so is watching at home, and will have, I know, the get well soon wishes of this vast global international audience. So the last caller will be Kenny in London. Oh, it's a one for the money. Go ahead, Kenny.
Hi, George. Yes, I'd just like to recommend the Elvis Presley documentary to you, because you seem to be a bit an Elvis fan.
I was a member of the official Elvis Presley fan club of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and had a metal badge, red and silver, to prove it. Go ahead, Ken.
Well, that's absolutely fantastic. I was probably an Elvis fan before I was even born, because my mum, she used to tell me that I'd kick on the inside of her womb to the rhythm of blue suede shoes.
There you go. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. So the documentary I want to recommend to you is called Elvis Presley, The Searcher. And it's absolutely such an amazing documentary. It goes into so much detail as to...
Who's made this? Who's made it, Kenny?
I don't know who made it. It's on YouTube. You can buy it on YouTube. It's like £8, but it's worth every penny.
It's called Elvis Presley,
The Searcher. It's based on a book. Yeah. It's mostly narrated by, I think, Priscilla Presley, but there's many other contributors for the Memphis Mafia, and the people who knew him the best.
Well, you know, I'll check that out, and I may very well buy it.
Also, George.
Yeah, quickly.
Also, do you remember when I phoned up to talk about the trans issue, but I got cut off after I started singing because I never asked your permission first, and you thought I was a nutter?
Go ahead. Give me some bars.
Well, the song that I was going to sing was actually an Elvis song. It's called Stranger in the Crowd, and I'd like to sing it now if that's okay with you.
Go ahead, Kenny.
Okay. I was standing on the corner at 7:15. I was down to my last cigarette, and the clock in the window at 11:15. I was watching all the people passing by me, going places. Just the loneliest guy in the town, looking for a friendly smile, but all that I could see were faces. And then, just like a taste of milk and honey, I found the stranger I'd been looking for.
Bravo! Absolutely brilliant, Kenny. Absolutely brilliant. One singer, one song. I've got the mic now. An unexpected ending to what I hope you'll agree has been a fine show. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back next week at the same time. The mother of all talk shows.